I was 11 years old when I was told, "You're going to the United States," to which I simply replied, "Okay," and went about my day. I had no reference with which to understand the magnitude of the change that was about to take place in my life. It wasn't my first time moving, so the process of getting rid of belongings felt familiar. After furniture at my old house was gotten rid of and preparations were winding down, I decided to start practicing English. I came across a book with introductory English, learned how to introduce myself, ask where the bathroom was, closed the book and said, "I'm ready for the United States." Boarding the bus to the city from the rural town I grew up in was the most painful experience about leaving Mexico. Leaving friends or my house wasn't difficult. This was the first time in a year we had come back to our hometown, and the first time we had seen our dog since we left him. He somehow made it into the bus we were boarding, and nobody could get him out. He wiggled under seats and scurried out of reach. The only way he would have calmed down was if I got off and took him home. But it was my time to leave. And even though I didn't know what awaited me, I knew in my heart I would never see him again. So I just had to sit there and be a traitor. The driver and his assistant took care of business and kicked them out of the bus. A proper goodbye isn't possible with a dog that refuses to leave your side. Finally, with 2 sentences of the English language, my brand new pair of shoes, and a Bible, I was on my way to the United States. In Sonora, I joined the rest of the group I would cross the border with. The energy began to run high. The anticipation and uncertainty were very apparent to my 11-year-old self. This was the part where I sort of began to shut down. I was exhausted from spending days in buses and unfamiliar surroundings. Everything was changing constantly without explanation, and I became a sort of witness. I didn't ask any questions. The only thing that made sense at this point was to do anything I was asked. Our group had been jumping from one hotel to another to avoid being cornered, and in one of those times, we just never stopped walking. It was dark now, and before I knew what was happening, there were miles of desert before me, only dimly lit by the moon. There was no formal announcement. I was finally crossing the desert. It was February of 2002. I had been told that I would have to walk the desert. The word desert conjured up endless sand dunes and a hot, burning sun. My experience was not that. Our group walked uneven, rocky, dry terrain. Our faces were constantly slapped by long, dry branches with thorns. We walked the whole first night with a few breaks. I was over it only a few hours in. I didn't know how long we were going to be out there, and before that first night ended, I was convinced I would never make it out. The next day, we took longer breaks to avoid being seen. I was exhausted. The second night was the coldest out of all of them, and thankfully we didn't have to walk as much. We had reached the American winter. On our final morning in the desert, I woke up to everyone yelling, so I too started running. I jumped on a truck that took us to an abandoned tiny building where we waited until a van came and got us. I mean, all of us were stacked on top of each other. We rode this van for 2 days in this manner, because we were taking the long way around to South Carolina to avoid getting caught. Fast forward to my junior year of high school. Things in my mind were okay now. I had assimilated. I had learned the language, made friends, all the things that I was supposed to do, and looked forward to the future. Little did I know that then Governor Mark Sanford signed a law that would make it illegal for a public education institution to accept me as a student. Today, South Carolina, along with Alabama, are the only 2 states in the US that explicitly prohibit undocumented students from enrolling at a public institution. For me, graduation was an impending doom because I knew that the promise of graduating high school for me meant joining the underpaid and overexploited undocumented workforce. And in 2009, the year of my graduation, that's exactly what I did. But in 2013, a miracle happened. 3 years after my graduation, the process to obtain DACA was announced. DACA very simply says that I can do the following: work legally, drive legally, and most important of all, I have the right to sit in a classroom at my community college. I got myself a job at Chick-fil-A, passed my parallel parking test on the first try. I enrolled at Tri-County for radiology, and I faced my mortal enemy, college algebra, twice. And after a fall, spring, and 2 summer semesters, I earned 26 credit hours towards radiology. I was making it. I hadn't been in school in 4 years. I had to pay out-of-state tuition. I wasn't eligible for student loans, but I trudged on a happy soldier because I didn't only feel that I was lifting myself up, but also those who groaned under poverty with it beneath me. In the fall of 2015, my advisor had to tell me that I couldn't be a radiologist because I wasn't really a citizen. DACA recipients in South Carolina cannot currently be licensed for occupational licenses. So I dropped my classes and continued working and tried to figure out what I should do. I switched over to engineering graphics, and everything was great, except I couldn't pass trigonometry and I hated it. I was on the verge of quitting the idea of college. What was it good for? I had been a part-time student for 4 years and nothing to show for it. I couldn't pass trigonometry, I couldn't be a licensed professional, and I was struggling so hard to pay for the tuition. Then something very curious happened. Tri-County Technical College began to offer what's called an abatement, not just for DACA recipients, but for other various statuses, including asylum students. I still don't know what abatement means, really. But it is not a scholarship, it is not a discount, it is not a handout to immigrants, but it's an abatement. If I qualified, my tuition would be less expensive than it had been. One could say comparable to in-state tuition, but not quite. I qualified, and just like the calm after a storm, my anxiety over money went away, because it wasn't nearly so much money to raise with my own bootstraps. I could finally think because the burden on my back was lightened. I switched to a transfer degree, and I finished this past May. I have an associate's. I finally made it. It took me 5 years, all because the administration of Tri-County Technical College became aware of students like me and decided that it could do something. Getting a degree was like gasping for fresh air after staying too long underwater. But not everyone has made it this far. Our administration made the attempt to rescind DACA in September 2017, and although it didn't entirely succeed, it no longer accepts first-time applications. I can renew, but other students who hadn't gotten around to applying yet cannot apply for it at all. They are still part of the undocumented workforce, in the shadows. There's not sitting in the classroom of their community college, no parallel parking test. Their story is no different than mine, except I got the education. I'm going to tell you why I'm here. I believe that the 6,000 plus DACA recipients in South Carolina, and those even without DACA, should have the right to a higher education. I believe that anyone, regardless of their socioeconomic background, should have access to attend a public education institution. I was empowered to tell my story because of other DACA recipients who I saw speaking up fearlessly, like my friend Ilse and Maria. Their example is what I needed in order to have the courage to keep talking about that which I am supposed to be ashamed about. They gave me permission to tell my story. With DACA in South Carolina, I have the right to work, drive, and sit in a classroom, but it isn't enough. Remember, DACA recipients aren't allowed to work as licensed professionals. My friend Ilse is moving to North Carolina to practice as a nurse. My friend Maria left for Colorado to be a teacher. Undocumented, with DACA, without DACA, with degrees, and without, South Carolina is losing the investment that it has put on us by keeping us in the dark with its laws. The federal government is the only one that can provide a true application and a path to citizenship, not a handout on a process. There is a loophole. I can get married, but In the meantime, South Carolina can do something. There is a House bill in South Carolina legislature called H.3404. H.3404 would very simply allow DACA recipients like me to apply for lottery-based scholarships, receive institution, and practice as licensed professionals. My friend Maria could come back from Colorado and teach here, and my friend Ilse wouldn't have to leave for North Carolina. Other DACA recipients who are taking years to get their degrees could do so more quickly and receive the aid they deserve. Let me tell you what H.3404 is not. It is not a handout. It doesn't stipulate that because you have DACA, you are going to get a scholarship, but it means if you do qualify for it, your status is not going to keep you from getting it. H.3404 does not mean that you automatically become a nurse or a teacher. It means that if you graduated and passed your boards and your certifications, your DACA status is not going to keep you from practicing. I understand the fear in advocating or even talking about these things, and it's okay. I mean, I'm risking so much by being open about so much, but my openness today is an invitation to find common ground. I'm doing it because after walking the desert, after feeling like I don't belong, and after fighting for 5 years for a 2-year degree, I finally realized that those aren't the things that make me foreign or make me the other. Those are the things that make me the most American. I believe that I belong here as much as you do. I think of my first year here, and I can feel the warmth of the community wrapping itself around me as if to comfort me from the bitter journey I had just taken. And listen, there will never be enough Donald Trumps, Bill O'Reillys, or Mark Sanfords to make me forget that. I will ask and I will encourage, because it was you South Carolinians who told my 11-year-old self I could do anything I put my mind to because I had reached the promised land, the United States. My hope and my dream is that those kids at the border who will hopefully and eventually be returned to their parents will not only get to stay in the US, but if they happen to come to South Carolina, we can say to them, welcome home now. Do everything that your parents hoped for and risked their lives for. Thank you.